You are listening to ZA Talk Radio, and welcome to one and all to another Sunday evening show on the radio which aims to create critical awareness of vital issues affecting humanity. I'm Faiz Kirsten, your host, and I'll be hosting the show on my own tonight because my co-host Julian is on a working assignment on the other side of the world at the moment. In fact, he went to France, and I spoke to him earlier this afternoon when he was on an airport on his way to Venice. So he's a real jet setter. And so we wish him a safe and enjoyable time abroad and a safe journey back home, of course. Anyway, I said we aim to create critical awareness of the vital issues affecting humanity. And an example of this, of course, are bank loans. Now, I know I keep using this example, but this is only because it is such a fundamental issue. Now, I don't know about you, but often, when I used to speak to people about this issue, they didn't actually believe me. Then I would ask them, how do they know what I'm saying is not true? I would ask them if they have any proof that what I just said is in fact false, and virtually all of them would say, no, they have no proof. So then I would ask them, how is it that they believe bank loans are in fact loans according to their understanding of the term loan, but they have no proof of this? And they would either, not answer me, or would say that according to the banks, they are lending money. And in fact, if it is a mortgage loan, you got the house, so you must have received money from the bank. The bank must have lent you some of its money. And that's it. That's all that's necessary for them to believe that an actual loan transaction took place. So they went to the bank for a loan, they got the house, so they must have been lent money. But I must say, though, that more and more people are now abandoning their incorrect beliefs on this matter, which is, of course, very heartening. So the point I'm really trying to make here is that many of the beliefs that we hold require no proof at all for us to hold them, although it is important to realize that this is different to logically deducing that something is true and then firmly believing it. It's very different to just blindly believing that excuse us for the technical issues basically that we're having at the moment. If you could just hang on one second. So let's get back to what we were saying. I think Julian on the other side of the world is trying to get hold of me because of our technical issues. So we apologize for that. So just blindly believing something is very different to believing that something, is true without proof, without logical deduction, without intelligent interpretation of the signs about something that it is true. A belief which is not based on facts is, of course, a false belief. And we know false beliefs are called delusions. And when I speak about delusions, I like to tell this joke, which is one of my favorites. And it goes like this. I actually have two favorite jokes. And this is one of them. And in fact, it was told to us by our pathology lecturer when I was in medical school in my third year. And he was talking to us about, or lecturing on the subject of syphilis, which is a sexually transmitted disease. And he was telling us this joke about the psychiatrist who was doing his ward rounds one day, and he came to the bed of the one patient, and he said to the patient, "Good morning, Mr. Brown." And the patient looked at him and said, "But I'm not Mr. Brown, doctor." And so the psychiatrist looked at him and said, "But that's very interesting. So who are you?" And so the patient said, "Well, I'm Napoleon Bonaparte." And so the psychiatrist said, "Well, that's interesting, but tell me, who told you that you are Napoleon Bonaparte?" And the patient looked at him and said, "Well, God told me so." And then just the patient in the next bed suddenly jumped up and said, "No, I did not." So we call this delusions of grandeur, a false belief in your own self-importance. Anyway, I think it's important that the questions we must ask ourselves is, what are beliefs? That's the main question, because without knowing what beliefs are, it's very difficult and probably not possible to know how they affect our lives. And I like to describe beliefs as instructions which are coded and stored in the cells of the nervous system and body. Similar to a software programmer who writes instructions into a computer program on how the computer should run or operate, so beliefs are instructions as to how we should feel, how we should act, or how we should behave. In fact, beliefs are instructions as to how our lives should run or operate. That's just my basic definition of a belief. It's an instruction. So to give you a great example of what I mean, let me quote, the words of someone who is regarded as the greatest boxing champion of all time, and I'm of course referring to Muhammad Ali. And he said, "To be a great champion, you must believe you are the best. If you're not, pretend you are." And he also said, "If my mind can conceive it and my heart can believe it, then I can achieve it." And another great example I also like to give is of beliefs as being, Roger Bannister, who on the 6th of May 1954 ran the mile in under 4 minutes. Now, before he achieved this amazing goal, it was commonly believed that such an achievement was not possible. But on this day, Bannister's belief instructed his entire being to do whatever was necessary to achieve this goal. But you know what was more amazing, in my view at least, was the fact that several more people achieved the same goal after Bannister did. And they only managed to do what they did, what he did, because they also came to believe that this was possible. And of course, another good example is Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, who were the first people to summit Mount Everest. And I'm sure you can think of many, many examples. So why am I harping on about beliefs? Well, the reason is that our guest tonight is going to be talking to us about a subject which is very close to my heart, having done quite a bit of research on the subconscious over the past few years. And the subject is how your beliefs affect your health. And his name is Bennie Naude. Now, I haven't met Bennie in person, but I've chatted with him, on the phone several times. And in gathering information about him for the show, I visited his website, which is at www.deepliving.com, and found that this is what he says about himself. He says that the first thing that people usually notice about me is that I'm tall, 1.93 meters, or if you prefer, 6'5", 6 foot 5 inches. And the second most common comment people make when they meet me, he says, is that they can't place my accent. That's because after growing up in South Africa and leaving for the UK when I was 26, I've lived and worked in England, Scotland, Europe, Africa, Australia, the Middle East, and the USA. I've worked through many tough and dark emotional times in my life, and discovering EFT in 2003 was literally a lifesaver. My first session with Paul Lynch blew me away, and I trained as an EFT practitioner almost immediately and eventually as a trainer. And he also says that I'd always been a left-brain analytical type of person, and I'd always believed that healing takes a long time, required a lot of hard work and had to be serious. I was completely blown away by my first experience with tapping. I got results, and it was fast, easy, and enjoyable, and I wanted to learn how to do it quick. So, Mr. Bennie Naude, are you there, brother?
I'm here, Fahad.
Oh, great, man. I thought you left us for a second there. I think Julian was trying to contact me. In fact, I know he was from the other side of the world. But somehow he tells us we're back on air, so that's something very heartening. Anyway, Bennie, I was introducing you. I don't know if you heard me.
No, I heard nothing, Fahad.
Okay, well, I just basically describe what you said about yourself on your website, and I also went, I sort of describe what beliefs are from my perspective. I see them as instructions as how our life should operate. They're basically instructions to us as how we should feel, how we should behave, how we should act, etc. And then I basically describe what you say about yourself on your website, that you're tall. People see you. The first thing they notice about you is that you're very tall, and they can't place your accent, and that you worked through, many tough and dark emotional times in your life. And your first session with Paul Lynch, blew you away, you said, and then you trained as an EFT practitioner. So, Bennie, thank you for joining us this evening. I really appreciate it. Once again, sorry for the apologies for the technical issues here. I think we're going to have to change our streaming service because we've been having endless problems, with this broadcast. But anyway, we back on air by the looks of it, according to Julian. Or if we're not, we're still going to be sending out the podcast anyway. So, Bennie, is there anything else you want to tell us about yourself, before we dive into tonight's subject?
No, I don't think so, Fahad. I think that covers it.
Say again?
Nothing specific. No, thank you. I'm ready to rock and roll about the topic that you picked. I think it's a fabulous one. And I'm ready to have a talk about beliefs and how it influences our health.
Okay, great stuff there, Bennie. So you said EFT has obviously helped you tremendously. And as you said, it was literally a lifesaver. Can you expand on this, Bennie? How did this EFT technique save your life or help you improve your life?
I came across EFT in 2003, and it was a very tough time for me. I'd been depressed for a long time, and I've tried, maybe like other people on the call, I've tried lots of different things, and nothing really worked. And then I was pretty desperate, and then discovered this thing called energy psychology. Went for my first EFT session, as you mentioned, with Paul Lynch, And something happened in that session that I didn't know was possible. And what happened was, I was quite upset about something that had happened to me that day. I was, a complete emotional mess. And within a few minutes, I'm talking about within the first 5 minutes of my session with Paul, it was like all the negative emotion just left my body. So all the overwhelm, the despair, the hopelessness, the despondency, the high level of emotion simply released. It was gone. It wasn't that I had suppressed it or, ignored it or distracted my attention somewhere else. When I tried to find it, it had actually gone. And as I said, I've never experienced something like that ever in my life, despite having done many different modalities, many different things. And was quite shocked by it initially, because I didn't know that was possible, that emotions could actually release in that way. So that was the initiative for me. After that session, before I left that day, I went to Paul and I said, listen, this is I want to know how to do this. So how do I learn how to do this? And then trained with him and his wife, Valerie, and eventually became an EFT practitioner and trainer myself.
Wow, that's a very interesting story, Benny. I sort of had a very similar experience with EFT when I first came across it many years ago. Being a conventionally trained doctor, I thought this was all hocus pocus,
Yes.
And then I downloaded this manual. It was written by Gary Craig, if I'm not mistaken, but it was a long manual. And I started reading this thing, and I tell you, within the first couple of minutes, I thought, wow, this sounds amazing. I mean, this can't be true. And then they were talking about quantum physics, and this thing just gripped me, And I read the whole manual. It took me, I think, maybe 3 hours. I just studied this thing, and I thought, no, man, this can't really be true. I mean, it was sort of out of my paradigm,
Yes.
And I started doing this thing. I said, the best way to see if this is really true is to actually try it. And so I learned the technique, and I did it on myself. And I promise you, I was absolutely amazed. I was blown away. I did it on myself, and I started feeling differently all of a sudden, And I read a case study as I was doing the research on this EFT, about a person who was at a party and they developed a serious allergic reaction. And before the paramedics arrived, there was somebody at the party there who knew EFT and started taking this person who was experiencing this allergic reaction. They took them through the EFT process. And the allergic reaction settled down and the person was fine. And when the paramedics arrived, there was no need for them to see this person because the person was completely fine. And one day I was sitting in my study and my daughter came into my study and she said, Dad, look at my lip. And I looked at her lip and it was extremely swollen, and immediately I could see it was an allergic reaction. And I thought, if I didn't know about EFT, I would have obviously reached for the antihistamines and said, take this,
yes.
this will settle it down. But something said to me, hey, I just remembered this case that I'd read about. And I said, hey, why don't we just try EFT quickly? And I tell you, I took her through the process. And before my very eyes, Benny, the swelling disappeared. I just saw it go down, zoop, and it was gone. And I was just sold on EFT. I can tell you many other stories, but I can identify exactly with what you're saying.
Well, what's great is that, as you say, you're a medical doctor. What I'm really appreciating and enjoying is that more professionals are starting to incorporate EFT with what they know. Now, I know for some professional people, EFT is a threat. And I've had a doctor say to me, don't be ridiculous. I've trained for 10 years to get here. What do you mean doing a couple of weekend courses? How can that help me? Thankfully, not everybody's quite as short-sighted. So, like you, I know other medical professionals like doctors and specialists and psychologists that's starting to bring EFT into their existing practice. So we're not talking about throwing out everything that experts know. We're simply talking about giving them an additional tool called EFT, which, as you know, is non-chemical, it's non-invasive. It's empowering to the extent that people can apply it to themselves. It typically works quickly. It often works when nothing else will. And the kind of list of benefits are so long that it's really just great to see more professionals opening up and using it. Ultimately, if we want to help our clients or our patients, then surely we'll do whatever we can to help them. And EFT is just, it's just a fabulous way to do it. And of course, I also just want to say, and I know that you know this, but just for people listening in, EFT doesn't always work for everyone on everything. Like everything else, there's more skillful ways to apply it and less skillful ways. So, somebody on the call that may have tapped on themselves for 5 minutes after being depressed for 10 years may not get the immediate shift. But if it's applied skillfully and consistently, then most people absolutely get results from it.
Yeah, I I used to run a small little EFT practice while I was working in trauma and emergency, but it wasn't possible to continue. It was just too much, actually. And you're right, sometimes people have very complex problems. There's aspects associated with their problems that if they don't deal with those aspects that are linked to the problem, then EFT doesn't work as well.
Exactly.
But I found in most cases it worked really brilliantly well, unless the patient has a real complex problem, like I said. But it works. It works, but it depends on the complexity of the problem. But by and large, it's such an amazing tool, and it's safe. It's unlike drugs, that have side effects. This is a safe tool, and I think, as Gary Craig said, it won't harm you. So try it on everything. It can only help you. It won't harm you. So I did it. I tried it on everything, and I even wrote a report on the subconscious mind. And one of the tools that I described there is EFT. The other tool that I really like to use is brainwave entrainment, which I use a lot, and it made a difference in my life. But EFT is a really powerful tool. Now, what I did was I described, beliefs as instructions. Like I said earlier, Benny, beliefs are instructions which are coded and stored in the cells of the nervous system and body. Would you agree with my sort of description of beliefs? That's just my definition, the way I see beliefs. They're like instructions which tell us how to feel, what our perception should be, and how we should basically behave and operate our lives. In fact, they control our lives, really, our subconscious beliefs. Is this correct, Benny?
I totally agree. Just using slightly different language, but totally supporting your point of view. It's the way that I look at beliefs is it's truths that we hold, or information that we hold as the truth. And the truth, of course, is probably a whole call in itself, because what is the truth? In the end, I only really have my truth. And what we now know from neuroscience is that a lot of our early beliefs that we take on in life, the emotional learnings, where we really start founding our beliefs about ourselves and how love works and how money works and how our bodies work and what's okay, socially acceptable and what not, that those types of beliefs that we take on, for example, I'm not good enough, or nothing I do will ever work out, or the world is a safe place, or the world is a dangerous place, whatever belief we take on based on our circumstances, we now know from fairly recent neuroscience that those beliefs actually get physiologically embedded in the limbic brain. It's also called the emotional brain. So you have physical structures called synapses that actually lock in these beliefs. And then once one of those beliefs are locked in, typically, we don't really have to think about it. It's just, as you say, it governs the way that we operate our lives. So it becomes as unconscious as it is for most of us to walk. Those of us that can walk, we just stand up and walk. We don't think about which muscles to move and which leg comes first and second. It's just an automated thing that we've learned. And of course, this is how beliefs impact our health. If we have beliefs in our system physiologically stored that's not supporting our health, then without even thinking about it, it can either cause us to get ill, or it could prevent us from getting better, from healing.
So these beliefs are then powerful things, Benny, if they're going to impact on our health either in a positive or negative way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if there's somebody maybe listening, not sure if this is true, you only have to look at the existence of the placebo effect. And you know that the placebo effect is where you'll give somebody a pill, an actual chemical that has been designed to have a certain effect on the body, like heal it, for example. And to another group of people, you give something that's typically just chalk, so it has no effect on the body whatsoever, but it's designed to look and feel and taste, everything like the real McCoy, the real tablet. And then we know that a large, some of these placebo effects, more than 90, sometimes up to 99% of people taking the chalk, they will heal from the disease in exactly the same way as people taking the chemicals. So we have already scientifically established how our beliefs, how they do actually affect our health.
Yes, the placebo effect is exceptionally powerful, I must say. And in fact, they think that upwards of 50% of pharmaceutical drugs work because of the placebo effect. In fact, some pharmaceutical company CEOs have admitted that they don't actually know how their drugs actually work. They don't know the mechanism of action. And it's thought that it just works through placebo. In fact, I think one of the antidepressants, if it's not, is it Prozac, if I'm not mistaken, they don't know how it actually works, but they think it's the placebo effect that actually making people feel better. So what you think, has a profound, or what you believe has a profound effect on how your body responds.
Absolutely. If you just take it even on a more basic level, that if you just spend a couple of minutes, like even now on this call, just really starting to think very negative, constricting, painful, maybe angry or fearful thoughts, within a few minutes, your whole physiology in the body will start responding to it. So maybe your shoulders will start slumping, your body will start contracting, and chemicals will be secreted in the brain, and you will actually feel down, or tired or anxious. So we know even at that simple level that our beliefs affect the way that we feel, in other words, affects our physiology. And I want to be just very clear, and it'll will unfold as you and I have this conversation tonight. I'm not suggesting that if you're really sick and ill, that just to say a few positive affirmations is going to heal you. I fundamentally don't agree. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that we have the proof already scientifically that our thoughts and our beliefs affect our health, and we also know it anecdotally by the way that we feel based on how we consistently think about ourselves or about life. So this, we already know this, and all that we're doing in this call is just want to highlight specifically how our health is impacted by our beliefs.
Yes. I did a lot of research on stress, over the years. Wrote a book called Goodbye Stress, How to Live a Stress-Free Life. And I came up with a model based on my research because I wanted to more clearly understand this thing about stress. Because they say stress is 95% of illnesses are caused by stress, chronic,
yes,
persistent stress. And I drew up this model, I sort of developed this model where actually, beliefs, thoughts, and beliefs actually trigger the stress response. And through that mechanism, when the stress response is triggered, the stress response, as you know, it's a survival mechanism. So
yes,
it's important that we have a stress response. If you're walking in a jungle or in a forest and you suddenly see a bear, thanks to the stress response, you take off and run away, or you just freeze on the spot. Or very few people will stand and stand around, wait around and fight the bear, So it's flight, fight, flight, and freeze.
That's it.
But if the stress response is triggered all the time, like on an ongoing basis, on a daily basis, then that is really destructive to the body because the body is not designed for that ongoing triggering of the stress response. And one of the things is that triggers the stress response, like I said, are your thoughts. So when people worry all the time, they're thinking negative thoughts, it's triggering the stress response, and then again, that's making you think even more negative thoughts. It becomes sort of like a vicious cycle or vicious circle, as they say. So thoughts lead to feelings, and feelings lead to, to thoughts. And so if you have to cut that cycle, you've got to break that cycle in order to prevent further harm to yourself. Is that right, Benny?
I totally agree. And if I want to just take it a step further or a step back, then what fuels our thoughts is our beliefs. If I fundamentally believe that the world is unsafe, then I will and must... Hey, Fayez?
Hey, are you there?
Yes.
Yes, sorry, Julian just he's joined us at some airport, Europe somewhere. So I don't think he's here. Julian, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. You guys are breaking up a little bit, but I just wanted to make sure that you're online, that you've succeeded, because I had to make a change online. Yeah, I'll explain all the details to you at another stage. So.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks a lot for that, Julian. Thanks a lot.
Because you should be able to be streaming now. It says you're online.
Okay.
But, okay.
No,
all the best. I'll leave you to it.
Thanks, Julian.
Thanks a lot. Sorry, Benny, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries,
Julian just came in from some airport in Europe. But anyway, sorry, where were we, Benny? You can go ahead.
I was saying that, if we take it a step back and ask ourselves where our thoughts come from, a lot of them come from our beliefs. So I was saying, if I have a fundamental belief that the world is unsafe, then I must have consistent thoughts with that belief. So then I will go around, constantly checking the windows in my house and putting up another electric fence and more burglar bars and whatever. Every time I walk down the street, I'll be anxious because I know the world is a dangerous place. Or if I have a belief that I'm going to get hurt, then constantly as I move through my life, I'm constantly going to be expecting, to be hurt. So that is by default causing stressful thoughts, which exactly as you said, means that the cortisol levels in my body will start rising, which is the stress hormone. Adrenaline levels will start going up. And exactly as you said, our bodies were not designed to have those on an ongoing basis. Yes, absolutely useful and crucial for our survival to warn us of imminent danger, but we were not designed to feel those chemicals in the body or to have them over long periods. So even when our beliefs is not directly related to health, we're not talking about somebody saying, believing they're going to get cancer or believing they're going to die young. We are talking about even general world views or beliefs about the world or about ourselves impact our health in this way.
Yeah, absolutely. And beliefs also come from past experiences, would you say, Benny, like traumatic experiences, childhood experiences?
Absolutely. There is a lot of research now around something called memory reconsolidation. Now, just very briefly, most of us know that the brain is what's called plastic. In other words, you can teach the brain new things. Neuroplasticity has kind of been around for quite a while. But what they've also found is that most of our childhood beliefs, and they're typically the most emotionally impactful beliefs, are stored in the limbic brain. As I said in the beginning of the call, they're actually locked in physiologically in the brain through synapses, like locking down and embedding this belief in our brains. So then that becomes almost like the operating system for how we go through lives, and they govern the way that we think and feel, the way that we operate, and in that way absolutely affects our health.
Yes, they talk about cellular memories, those past experiences. They also have inherited memories. Traumatic experiences cause these memories to reside in your cells, and you develop beliefs associated with these memories. And they say when these beliefs or these memories are reactivated for whatever reason, oftentimes subconsciously, you're not aware that they're being reactivated. Something's happening in your mind. Your subconscious is picking up something's associated with these memories. Then it triggers a stress response, and you don't know that this is happening, but in your body, your stress response is being triggered, and the next thing you know, you're getting ill because the stress response, as we just said, if it's triggered on an ongoing basis, it has a negative impact on your body, especially through the immune system. What it does, it weakens your immune system. And when you have a weakened immune system, then you're prone to a whole lot of diseases, including cancer. And so these beliefs are what they call self-sabotaging, self-limiting beliefs, and it affects your life in many ways.
Absolutely. So on the one hand, you may have had an extreme trauma, like, may have been held at gunpoint or been in a horrific car accident or a fire, being burnt or whatever it may be. If that trauma, or let me rephrase, until that trauma has actually been resolved, and what that means resolved, it means you'll be able to talk about the intimate details of that horrific event without any emotional response. Until you get to that point. And again, we're not talking about just getting over it. In fact, that is also been scientifically proven is impossible. If you have had a severe trauma and that's stored in the amygdala and the limbic brain, it is impossible to just get over it. So any time that anything happens in your life that reminds your unconscious mind remotely of the original incident, exactly as you just said, it then starts triggering these warning signs and go, listen, this thing looks remarkably like the thing that happened 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, and the body responds as if the original event is about to happen again or is already happening again. So to whatever extent your trauma has been unresolved, to that extent, you will re-experience the original trauma again and again and again and again without necessarily knowing this. So that's like a severe case where you may have had horrific trauma. But let's take an apparently innocent situation where, let's say a 7 or 8 year old boy is in a classroom and he answers a question from the teacher wrongly, and the teacher completely loses it and smacks him around the ears, and the whole class is laughing at him. He may, at that specific point in time, take on a belief that he's stupid, for example, or if he takes risks, he's going to get hurt. Unless this is resolved in the limbic brain, because again, those types of emotional learnings get embedded in the limbic brain, he will then grow up and that will be one of his governing beliefs in life. Now, when he's an adult and he's 55 and he's about to make a boardroom presentation, it's very unlikely he will remember this incident that happened when he was 7. It's very unlikely that he may have conscious thoughts, that he's stupid. But what he will probably experience is extremely high levels of stress about the presentation, which intellectually he may know is completely, out of proportion, but he wouldn't be able to control that. And again, until the underlying belief is resolved, and thankfully we now know how to do that, that person, I believe, runs some serious health risks because of the high levels of stress caused by belief that has been in his system, probably unconsciously, sometimes for decades.
But they say these beliefs that you develop through these negative experiences are there to actually protect you. Could you expand on that, Bennie? For example, I'll give you maybe a short example. Say a group of people are walking down the road, and there's a little dog that comes running towards the group, and one of the people in the group, takes off in the opposite direction and hides behind a tree and starts shaking, while everybody else is standing around petting the dog. Now, maybe that person had a bad experience with a dog, when they were little, and they don't remember it, but the subconscious remembers it, and they developed a belief that all dogs are dangerous. So that belief is there to protect the person in the event that, they come across another dog that's really going to do them some harm. So would you call these sort of protective beliefs, self-protective beliefs?
Absolutely. I think we take on these beliefs in a way to protect ourselves. So, let's take that example of the little boy that I just made up. If he decides in that moment, so, another word for taking on a belief is making a decision. If he decides in that moment that he's stupid, then obviously the best thing for him to do would be never to speak up in class again. So this limiting belief, I'm stupid, which will probably shut him down for life until he does the emotional work required to release this belief and take on a more empowering one. That belief will be in the unconscious mind, as you say, and will do whatever it can to protect him from being rejected or ridiculed or humiliated again. So the intention of these beliefs are 9 times out of 9, is positive and comes from wanting to protect the person. But when you actually start exploring them, in the majority of cases, they actually have the opposite effect. So they actually start to hurt us at some point. And that's why it is, I think, is crucial, if you want to have any sense of well-being or health, to actually do the emotional work and take a good look at what beliefs you are still carrying that's not really serving you. And again, I just want to emphasize this because it's so important. The brain, as probably all people on this call will know, have different parts to it. And to simply say to somebody who's obviously intelligent and smart and attractive and popular and whatever, who still has a belief that they are not good enough, it is an absolute waste of time to tell somebody, what are you worried about? You're great, you're beautiful. Because the intellectual, the logical, the almost like day-to-day evidence that the underlying belief of not being good enough is invalid is in a different part of the brain. So, to say to somebody who's really scared of an event coming up, just get over it, it's not a big deal, is not particularly helpful because you're talking more to the cortical, logical parts of the brain, but the emotional learnings that we keep talking about, the painful ones that typically happen between 0 and 6, although you can also, of course, take on beliefs later in life, but the majority of them happens between 0 and 6. When a child's brain waves is in a different pattern, it's in what's called a hypnagogic
state.
Thank you. Which is almost like just open to programming. Whatever comes in just kind of goes in. There's no filtering mechanism to say, well, hold on. Just the fact that I got the answer wrong doesn't mean that I'm stupid. If the teacher told him he's stupid, that belief is very likely to go in. And they've also found a chemical that they've only ever found in children's brains that assists the brain in learning. So we know that the first 6 or 7 years in life is not only crucial, but it's also the time where it seems that most of us really deeply held and therefore unconscious beliefs are formed. So, however these beliefs come, whether you had a great childhood or a not so great childhood, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that when you're an adult, I believe that the responsibility is ours to do the emotional work, to go and have a look, see what beliefs I still have about life that doesn't serve me, and then release them. With EFT, there's other techniques too that people can use to change beliefs, like matrix reimprinting, for example, is a good one, so that we have a better chance of actually being healthy and happy.
Yeah, it's so crucial, the kids first few years on this planet, from 0 to 6, I think it is, when they're in the theta state. And so they're really not cognitively using their cognitive brain. They're not thinking logically. They're basically just downloading information. So what they hear, what they see, is just being downloaded into their subconscious and sits there oftentimes as beliefs. And so, knowing this as a parent or as a teacher, I think is crucial, because oftentimes we damage kids in the very early parts of their lives, and they go through life, as disadvantaged people, suffering through life because of those early experiences. But I think more and more people are starting to become aware of the fact that, kids are, I'd say, vulnerable at this stage, and they need to be treated in a special way.
Yeah. The thing with that, Faiz, sometimes the let's say the painful event could come from an adult, who's intentionally trying to hurt or harm because of their own wounds or pain or past or whatever. But it's also important to understand that sometimes we take on these limiting beliefs because we are only small and we don't have the capacity of adults. Very often we take on these beliefs because we misunderstood something. So these beliefs are not only formed by abusers and people who harm and scream and shout at children. They're also sometimes a byproduct of kids just not quite understanding. Let me give you a practical example. Very often when parents divorce, the children think, or a child will think, it's his or her fault that the parents got divorced, even though it may have nothing to do with them. So, again, for me, I think it is important to go back and see where our beliefs come from and going to change them and resolve them. But just know that sometimes very innocently children can also take on beliefs that would damage their health on the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to come back to the self-limiting, self-sabotaging beliefs that trigger the stress response, and they often result in inappropriate behavior. And I sort of identify two mechanisms how beliefs will affect your life and your health and wellness. The one was basically, the triggering of the stress response directly results in illness and disease through weakening your immune system. Also, it causes you to think sort of negative thoughts. You have these negative feelings, and your behavior becomes negative. So you start maybe not exercising, drinking too much alcohol, smoking, all of these negative sort of lifestyle behaviors, which then themselves result in illness and disease in an indirect way. Let me put it that way.
Absolutely.
The immune system mechanism is a sort of a direct mechanism of causing illness and disease. Would you say that's correct, Benny?
I totally agree. Just this weekend I was teaching a group in EFT, and we talked about this, and it's the classic think, feel, do, have cycle. So if I start thinking, let's say I'm from a family where, historically all the men died of heart attacks before the age of 50. So if I grew up consistently hearing that message and eventually started believing that was going to happen to me anyway, so if I constantly had these thoughts, well, I'm going to die anyway, there's nothing I can do about it, all the men in my family dies by the age of 50 of a heart attack, then it doesn't really matter what I do. So if I start having, thinking these thoughts, and I start feeling like, I'm just a victim, it doesn't matter what I do anyway, nothing's going to change, then I start doing exactly as you said. So I don't care what I eat, I don't care what I smoke, I don't care what I drink, because I'm going to die anyway, who cares? And then eventually I will have the heart attack, and then I get to be right about the whole cycle. I knew this was going to happen. And typically when people say that, they completely bypass and ignore the role that they played in playing out this beautiful cycle to the letter T.
That's so crucial that you mentioned that, Benny. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because
absolutely.
Because it works through epigenetics. Because
absolutely,
what your beliefs are doing, they're actually telling your genes how to express themselves. Because that when Watson and Crick discovered the DNA helix, they developed this thing called the central dogma, which said that genes control life. Yes. But that's been sort of poo-pooed. It's actually been discounted. It's been found to be completely untrue. Genes are just a blueprint. Genes don't actually control anything. They're just sitting there, and they are actually controlled by things outside of themselves. A blueprint is like a plan, on how to build a house. The plan itself doesn't build a house, it just sits there. People just follow the plan. So it's an important point that you mentioned there, is that your beliefs are actually, you may have no genes to tell you that you're going to get cancer, or no cancer-forming genes, but because everybody around you is getting cancer, you develop this belief that, perhaps I can get cancer. And then this belief is starting to tell your genes, to express themselves in the form of cancer. or select cancer genes. And I think it's a very crucial point for people to realize is what they're thinking, what they're believing has a direct impact on the state of health and wellness.
It does. Let's take that a step deeper. So I come from a family of tall men. I'm 6'5". My dad is tall. My brother is tall. So it is in my genes to be tall. And as far as I know, in this lifetime, if I keep all my limbs, I'm going to stay tall. I'll probably may get shorter with age. That's kind of natural. But within reason, I'm going to be a tall man by the time I die. However, if I was born into a family, again, with a history of cancer, a history of heart disease or whatever, it may even be that the blueprint, as you call it, that my genes, by the time I get born, and genes are kind of on and off switches. It may be that the heart switches or the heart disease switches, if we just simplify for the sake of conversation, are turned to on. So that means I have a propensity, or I may have a propensity to have a heartache. People say being overweight runs in the family. So it may very well be that a child is born with those genes turned on, which means they may have a more of a chance to be overweight, have a heart attack, have breast cancer or whatever. However, it is what you do from that point onwards that I think really influences things. We know now that we turn our genes on and off nanosecond by nanosecond. When I was at school, like you said, I was taught that whatever is in your genes, that's it. There's nothing we can do about it. We now know that's not true. That with our emotions and with our thoughts and the way we feel, we actually turn on and off genes. So if even people with a propensity for a certain type of disease or condition, diabetes or overweight or whatever it may be, if you continue to insist that that is the way it is, then I think it's going to be very hard to heal.
Correct.
If, however, you're open to the possibility that, yes, okay, I get it. I come from a whole line of family, with heart attacks. Let's take a look at how those people lived and what they ate and whatever else. And I am here now with my beliefs and my thoughts and my feelings, and of course taking some logical, healthy action like regular exercise and eating well and drinking water and making sure you get enough sleep and not strapping 12 mobile phones to your head, it is much more likely that you can actually either remain healthy or, if you've already fallen ill, to heal from that condition by releasing this expectation of becoming ill or dying young or whatever it may be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's so crucial. They actually say, I was just wondering, why does EFT work, the way it does, if it's an energy tool? And we're dealing here with molecules, we're dealing with chemicals in the body. Why does EFT work as an energy tool, Benny?
I don't think anybody really knows. That's the short answer. What we do know now, and I know you're going to mention my website at the end, I've uploaded at the end of last year about 40 research articles where it's been clinically proven that EFT works. And what we have, or what they have discovered, is that, for example, the cortisol levels in the body starts dropping, which, as you know, is a stress hormone, and prolonged stress hurts the body and causes the vast majority of disease. It causes the adrenaline levels to come down. It seems to stabilize a lot of different levels in the body. So I don't know why actually stimulating these points have this healing effect, just like I don't know why acupuncture with putting needles into people seems to help, but it does. So the best that I have is to say that other than the, probably hundreds of thousands or millions of anecdotal bits of evidence that we have that EFT works, the clinical trials are now actually proving scientifically that it does have this healing effect on the body. Years ago, I did a presentation in Holland, and the woman I was working with, I did an EFT session for her on stage in front of the audience. They had a brain wired up to a big monitor so everybody in the audience could see it. And at the time, so I was tapping with her, which already started just normalizing her brain waves. And when we got to the point in time where the actual whole trauma was released, her brainwave patterns just went into this very beautiful pattern, just like a really natural, easy, healthy pattern. I don't know why that happens. I just know that it does.
Yes, I saw some studies. I read quite a few studies. One of the studies actually showed that EFT dissipates the stress response. So you can, really sort of stop the stress response in its tracks, so to speak, just by doing EFT. That's one of the way it works. It definitely changes brainwave patterns. They sort of compared EFT with medication in an anxious person. And the anxious person's brain, when they looked at the brainwaves, it was completely chaotic. And then they gave them, anxiolytics, which is tablets to medication to relieve the anxiety, and then they did EFT on another group, and the difference was amazing. The tablets, the anxiolytics, the medication did nothing to the brainwave patterns, just relieved the person's symptoms, but the brainwave pattern was still there, a chaotic brainwave pattern. Whereas EFT actually changed it completely to a more relaxed type of mental state. So it definitely has a physical impact. But they're also mentioning that they're saying that these memories and these beliefs are actually they're non-physical energy frequencies that reside in the cells. So they're not physical, molecules, but they're frequencies, and therefore you need, energy tools to basically neutralize these, change these frequencies, because these are chaotic frequencies and they're triggering the stress response. And by using these energy tools, they actually change these frequencies, and so they limit their impact that they have on the, on the genes and the gene expression.
The other thing, of course, that also causes a stress response, we talked about unresolved trauma earlier, and part of the brain is called the amygdala, and that's like, if you want, it's almost like the trauma center of the brain. What they've also established is that with EFT tapping, it actually seems, and with matrix reimprinting, it seems to send a message to the amygdala that the trauma is finally over. Until that point, the amygdala is constantly on high alert and will pull on the body to recreate whatever physiological responses, including high alert, high tension, high anxiety, ready to fight or flight. And what EFT Matrix does is it passes a message to the amygdala. It's almost like it chills the amygdala out and says, listen, I get that this thing happened 40 years ago or 4 days ago, and now it's actually over. You can stand down now. So people routinely, can overcome things, for example, like panic attacks or sleeplessness or anything that is associated with high levels of anxiety, because the message finally gets to the amygdala that the trauma is actually over.
Yeah, absolutely. Many years ago, I discovered something called an amygdala hijack when I was researching emotional intelligence. I don't know if you've heard the term amygdala hijack. I almost think it was coined by... what's the guy who was the guru of emotional intelligence? I forget his name now. Anyway, came across the term amygdala hijack, and I discovered that EFT can actually nullify or minimize the amygdala hijack, where amygdala hijacks or takes over your cognitive logical brain, and you basically then just function on emotions rather than logical thinking. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, this is, people say to me, I did this stupid thing yesterday. I can't believe I said that in the heat of an argument, or, whatever. When you understand the science behind it, it actually makes perfect sense. Because exactly what you just said, when the amygdala... Let's go back to the example I used earlier. Somebody was 7 years old, they gave the wrong answer to a teacher, he smacked him, told him he was stupid, and the whole class laughed. If that issue hasn't been resolved yet, so it hangs around the limbic brain, and the amygdala knows, listen, this type of situation gets me into trouble. Now, age 55, as I said, the man is about to do a presentation to the board, and he just has these high levels of panic and emotion. Even if he thinks that it's ridiculous, and he's done his presentation 10 times before, and they always love his presentations, he may still go into what you call the amygdala hijacking, because it's a different part of the brain that takes over. The limbic brain says, listen, we are in a life-threatening situation here, or a very dangerous situation. I'm going to override and overrule anything else that you may think or do. And even in that sense, you can see how the think, feel, do, have cycle plays out. So let's say the man becomes very anxious and very panicky. We know from high levels of anxiety and panic and stress that blood starts flowing away from the brain to the outer extremities, which actually means your brain doesn't function as well as it can. Effectively, it means you are not as intelligent as you really are. So now he goes into the presentation, he gets asked an awkward question, panic levels shoot through the roof, blood starts draining from the brain in preparation for fight or flight, which is completely inappropriate in this situation. But that's what happens anyway, which means he's actually less intelligent. He comes up with some mumbling answer, or some what he will call later this ridiculous, stupid response. It isn't received well by the board, and he walks there saying, you see, I knew it was going to happen. So we're back again to the same cycle, which is the reason why I keep saying that it doesn't matter how these things came about. I do believe it's each of our own responsibilities to go in and clear the stuff out. So if you have any like out of proportion reaction about anything in your life, I will bet you everything I own it's to do with some sort of unresolved emotional trauma, difficulty, pain, limiting belief, whatever it is, that can be released through tapping or something similar, so that we can actually send a message to the whole body, the trauma's over, and be present here now, to kind of deal. And we're not talking about, living in la la land. I believe that fear is a natural part of being alive. When a dangerous situation comes up, or one that I perceive as dangerous, I will feel anxiety. We're not talking about completely, just floating through life. We are talking about responses that are in proportion to the event that's actually happening.
Yeah, I think that's a critical point, that if it's disproportionate to what is happening, then that's oftentimes a reflection of some kind of trauma in the past. Is this correct, Benny?
Absolutely. Yeah. And then I want to go back to epigenetics, because you mentioned it earlier. And people who like reading may want to read the work of Dawson Church. He wrote a book called The Genie in Your Genes. And that book, if anything, turned this theory on its head, that our genes are programmed and that's the way it is. So the idea of epigenetics, again, if I just keep it very simple, because I'm not an expert in it either, is epigenetics explain how our cells behave in a certain way that's different to whatever our genes have been programmed to do. So if my genes have, let's say again, a propensity for cancer, for example, how is it then possible that my cells stay healthy, or vice versa? If I have no cancer in my family, so I'm born with no cancer genes turned on, how is it possible for me to contract cancer? It proves that the cells get their information from somewhere other than our genes or our DNA. And the theory at the moment is that information, unlike the cell memory theory that had been around for a while, that the cells actually have no memory. This is also based on the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton, who wrote The Biology of Belief, that our cells actually have no cell memory itself. What they do have is little antennas that pick up information. And one of the bits of information that it picks up is our thoughts, our feelings, and our beliefs, and then also get its instructions from thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, in addition to getting instructions from our DNA and our genes.
Right. Absolutely. Well, that's a very interesting point there, actually. Yeah, so just to recap, so the way your beliefs affect your health and wellness is through the main mechanism is actually through affecting the stress response. And then that actually either makes you think negative thoughts and feel negative feelings and behave in a negative way, which then impacts on your health and wellness, or weakens your immune system, which then obviously makes you extremely vulnerable to illness and disease that way. And so those are the two ways that people need to understand how their health and wellness is affected by their beliefs. So it's critical then that they identify all these beliefs that are holding them back and causing them to do the wrong things in order for them to optimize their health and wellness. Would you agree with that, Benny?
I do, and I also think it's important to add a very big proviso there. So, what we can do, if we just take this one side, is really start blaming ourselves and saying, well, I have this disease, what was I thinking? What are my beliefs? It must be my fault. Try and kind of find fault ourselves and blame ourselves for the situation we're in. The world that I live in, I cannot believe that there's always a direct link. So, for example, somebody who has cancer, I don't subscribe to the school of thought that says they either must have thought they're going to get cancer, they expected they're going to get cancer, or as is commonly said, they must have unresolved anger issues. I think that is vastly oversimplifying quite a complex disease. What I am saying is, regardless of how it came about that somebody is ill, the responsibility really comes in what you're going to do from this point forward. And if you have an ingrained belief, for example, that it's going to be impossible for you to heal, it's going to be very hard for you to heal. So, for example, it is common for most of us, if we get told something by someone in uniform, like a doctor, you have 3 months to live, the vast majority of us will actually take that as truth. And therefore start taking on a belief that that's the way it's going to be. And therefore, by implication, have a belief that it's going to be impossible to heal. Or you may read up about a disease on the internet or somewhere else, and it says, life expectancy, so many years. Here's what you can expect. This is the way it's going to go. Now, I'm not suggesting that information is made up. Based on history, that information is probably absolutely true. But it's back to personal responsibility. If you want to insist on the fact that your disease is incurable, if you want to insist on the fact you will be on medication for the rest of your life, if you want to insist on the fact you will be in pain and the best you can do is to manage it, I'm just saying I think that's not necessarily the healthiest way to get healthy. It is probably a very good way to stay stuck in your disease. So it's kind of a two-way approach for me. Yes, let's absolutely see how I contributed to my disease, if I did, and do whatever emotional work I can to see what beliefs may have caused the disease. But let's not say, I'm not going to rest until I find the belief that's caused this disease. Let's also use our belief systems to help us get healthier. A lot of work was done by Dr. David Hamilton. He wrote a number of books. One of them is called It's a Thought That Counts. And he interviewed people around the world who healed themselves from so-called incurable diseases. And the one thing that they all had in common is they all believed that they would get better. And the second thing is they all actually imagined themselves getting better.
That's a crucial point, that imagination, that visualization.
Yeah.
Very crucial. Go ahead, Benny. Yeah, critical.
No, so I just want to say, that's just the thing. I want to caution people against going on a witch hunt, either for themselves when they're ill, or for people that they look after when those people are ill. And if I take it to the point of extreme, it's like, hey, come on, John, why have you got cancer? What have you been thinking? I think that's, other than completely ridiculous and insensitive, I think, once again, it's oversimplifying. So let's all take responsibility, if we want, to resolve our unresolved emotional stuff for the reasons that we've mentioned in various ways on this call, and also start exploring and see what beliefs do we actually hold about getting better. And if you ultimately in your heart don't believe that you're going to get better, I don't think that you will. Or if you do, it may not last. So then using something like EFT or matrix reimprinting to help you release this expectation and almost like insistence that you're unable to get well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great stuff there, Benny. I want to Jackie, thanks a lot for that. One of the listeners actually mentioned it's actually Daniel Goleman who coined the term amygdala hijack, or
thank you.
The guru of emotional intelligence. Thanks for that, Jackie. Benny, I want to change direction a little bit, if you don't mind. I want to sort of talk about beliefs, how beliefs actually affect the health of the world, rather than individual people per se. I don't know, it's obvious, to most people who are awake that the world is in a state of chaos and disharmony, with suffering, wars and death and destruction, being the order of the day. And, my view is that the reason the world faces the serious problems it does is because, these diabolical beliefs, how you mentioned about evil people, affecting little children earlier on, that these people hold beliefs. I mean, there's many people who hold these diabolical beliefs, and especially those who basically control the world. So my view is that this kind of evil programming, of those who are sort of at the top of the pyramid of control, is at the heart of the world's problems. I don't know if this is something, you've thought about, Benny, or you want to talk about maybe?
Well, two responses to it. The first one specifically regards to physical disease, and it's not quite what you talked about, but I think it's relevant, is the collective beliefs that we hold about disease.
Right.
Like if you say to most people, you use the word cancer, it's usually quite a predictable response. Collectively, we have made this whole thing about cancer, and there's the fight against cancer. If you look at all the material, most of the literature that I've seen, it's all about fighting and killing and overcoming and whatever else. So there's a collective energy also around cancer or around diabetes. We all know when you have diabetes type so and so, then this is what happens. So I also strongly believe in the power of collective consciousness in the way that we set up and therefore perpetuate diseases. And I'm not a big one for conspiracy theories. But I do think that there is something about collective consciousness around disease. In the bigger picture, like the world picture that you talk about, I have one response to that. I think if there was one root cause of all of it, it would be unresolved trauma.
Right.
I think the only time that I want to hurt you or anybody else is a time when I'm in so much pain that that's just kind of the obvious thing to do. And the only reason that I know of that people are in so much pain that they want to hurt somebody else is when they have unresolved trauma, unresolved emotional stuff that causes so much pain that they need to do very extreme things to just relieve the pain that they're feeling at the moment, or the pain that they don't want to feel.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I mean, there's a lot of suffering in the world, as we all know. You just put, I don't watch TV, but I mean, you see on the internet, sort of follow one or two websites, news websites, and you basically, there's just bad negativity coming out of everywhere. And these people basically who's perpetrating this violence and this cruelty on other people, they must hold, traumatic, memories basically that's driving their evil behavior. And
I think they do, and I think it's then just perpetuated. If I grew up in a household of gangsters and this is how it is, there'd be a very good chance that I would have turned out the same way.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
So that's the one side. If I want to point the finger at them, that's why they are that way. They have unresolved trauma. That's why they rape the world. At another level, though, I think the solution is actually much simpler, maybe, than most people will realize. I listen to the way that people talk, and the vast majority of people that I hear talking about politics, about money, about banks, about oil companies, about whatever, they talk about what is wrong and what is bad and what should be killed and stopped, and it's the corruption. And once again, I'm not saying those things aren't factually true. I'm saying that in my experience, most of the focus goes on the problem, and we know from a quantum physics point of view, what you focus on expands. So all the energy is directed towards the problem, and typically very little towards a solution of sorts. So, we can wait for them, whoever they are, to go do their emotional work. I'm not going to put much money that will happen in my lifetime. Although, times are changing, I'm suggesting that instead of waiting for them, whoever they are, that each of us take responsibility and do what we can to start imagining a solution rather than just a problem. And again, I'm not suggesting, positive affirmations, I think is how do I put this? Is probably widely misunderstood, and it's not necessarily the most effective tool. We're not talking about saying things are great when they are not. I am talking about acknowledging when things are not that great, releasing your emotions about that with something like EFT or matrix reimprinting, and then starting to put your focus and attention on a possible solution. I think that's the way that we will quickly change the world in ways that we cannot even imagine. But maybe because it's such a simple idea, most people just think it cannot be that simple.
Yeah, I completely agree with you that we have to focus on solutions, but we must acknowledge that there are problems, and must understand, my view is that we must understand these problems quite clearly and quite deeply if we're going to sort of come up with real and effective solutions. But we must focus on the solutions. I really completely agree with you there. Because focusing on the problems all day long, it's not going to solve them.
Well, exactly. Complaining about this politician and that government party, it doesn't help except contribute more energy to the existence of that phenomenon the way that it is. And I also want to just be clear, I'm not necessarily talking about envisaging the exact solutions. I have no idea how to solve the poverty in Africa. I just don't. What I do and can very easily imagine is what things would be like if that were the case. And if people can use their imagination to heal from incurable diseases, why couldn't we use our imagination to heal the world from apparently incurable poverty, violence, crime, drugs, whatever the thing may be? I think it's all the same. I think we all inherently have incredible creative powers inside of us, and most of us just unconsciously focus it on things that we don't want and then kind of act surprised when we get more of the same, as opposed to focusing it on what we do want, on not necessarily the technicalities of a solution, but starting to envisage a world where people are happy, when people have enough food, where people can sleep in comfort, when people are treated well. And going back maybe 20, 30 years, there was research done, I think it was the war in Lebanon, between Lebanon and Israel at the time, where they had these meditation groups that used to do meditation at points of high conflict. And they have statistically proven that during the times when these conscious meditation groups met, that the violence was less during those times. They also did it, I think, in Chicago, maybe even New York, many years ago in the States, when these big groups of people came and meditated on peace as opposed to against violence, that the crime rates dropped in ways that they to this day cannot explain. You know, Mother Teresa said, don't come ask me to march against violence.
Yes.
Come ask me to march for peace.
Yeah.
And I think that is the attitude with which we'll change the world.
Yes, I'm aware of that study. It was quite an interesting study, actually. I mean, the levels of violence actually dropped, in response to meditation. Yeah.
And when you think about it, Faiz, either we're all connected or we aren't. And apparently we are. From a spiritual perspective, we've been hearing this forever. Scientifically, it's been proven that we are connected. So, in effect, it actually makes perfect sense. That we have collectively, we've created this universe the way that it is, or this planet at least, the way that it is. So that also means that collectively we can change it. And maybe instead of sending people that you don't like politicians, whatever, bad vibes, knowing that you're just sending it to yourself, consider the possibility of sending them some good vibes and some love and light and healing and happiness and health and whatever, and see how that may change things for you.
Yeah, love is key. I think that's a key emotion that people should strive to experience most of the time, actually. But in my sort of research over the years, I always try to find out or try to determine what is the actual root cause of the problems in the world, because obviously as a doctor I've been seeing lots of real traumatic experiences that people have been going through, and obviously translating into illness and disease and destroyed lives, etc. And I came to the conclusion that it's really the diabolical programming of those who really control the world. Like I say, they determine policy in countries, what the law would be, what the healthcare system would be like, etc., etc. And we know these things are very dysfunctional. The legal system is dysfunctional, the healthcare system is dysfunctional. That's why we just can't seem to solve the problems there. And I looked at where does this programming come from, because if you really study these systems, they're really, really dishonest, they're dysfunctional, and they're causing a lot of problems. And it's human beings that basically create these systems. I'm not going to go into the sort of the non-human entities which influence, the thinking and beliefs of human beings. This is another subject completely on its own. I don't think it would be fair to talk about that tonight. But I came across, this guy called Mark Passio. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, Benny.
No.
Yeah,
no.
He was actually, as he explained, when I looked at his work and what he was saying, it put a lot of things, made a lot of sense to me. What I was seeing in the world and what I'm still seeing today. He was actually a priest in the Church of Satan. I didn't even know there was such a thing, actually, until I came across Mark Passio. And he sort of left his religion because he was angry with his family for telling him the wrong things about religion. And then he went into Satanism. And I think about 8 years later, he left Satanism because it was just too much for him, apparently. It was way beyond what he expected it would be. And then he started speaking out against, Satanism. But what the interesting thing that I learned from him was that the Church of Satan has 4 pillars. They sort of live their lives by 4 pillars, which are basically 4 beliefs. And that started making a lot of sense to me. And they basically programmed the minds of humanity with these 4 beliefs, these 4 pillars. And I thought, this can't be true. But when I looked at it a little bit deeper into it, it looks like it is true. And he said that a lot of people are actually Satanists and they don't even know that. And I thought, wow, that's a really strong thing to say. So let me look at what you're saying, And so I looked at it, and one of the first pillars, something called self-preservation, is the highest ideal. You see, they say there's nothing higher than yourself, almost in a sense that you are God, So you must look after yourself first, regardless of the cost to others, children included. Now, if you look at the ego-driven behavior of a lot of so-called normal people, one can think, that people are living their lives based on this kind of belief, that there's nothing higher than yourself, so your egos, so you got to look after yourself first, regardless of everybody else. I thought, that seems to be quite a relevant point there. The second one also grabbed me was something called moral relativism. I don't know if you've heard of that, Benny.
No.
It means that you subjectively make up the rules of what is right and wrong. In other words, it's a subjective thing. There's nothing objective about right and wrong, Right is what you feel is good for you according to your preferences, whims and fancies, and wrong is what you feel is bad for you. So if you want to break a contract or not disclose information in the contract or abuse a child sexually, if it's what you think is right, the right thing to do right now, then you just go ahead and do it. That's called subjective morality. And I thought, well, that explains a lot. I mean, there's things that you and I will just never do because we hold beliefs that that's just completely wrong. But these guys who have these satanic thoughts or beliefs, this pillar, the second pillar, they live their life by it, they just do these things. The third one is social Darwinism, where people believe they're superior in terms of to other groups, classes of people because they have more money, they're more intelligent. And the last one is eugenics, where they because they believe they are superior, they determine who lives and who dies. And I'll give you an example of one of the people who are in control, living their lives by this moral relativism. A woman was called Madeleine Albright. I think she was Secretary of State of America at the time, USA, which was interviewed about the war in Iraq, and where 500,000 innocent children were killed, and they didn't find any weapons of mass destruction there. And they asked her, does she think it was worth it going into that country and killing, all these children? And she said, yeah, no, she thought it was worth it. And she never batted an eyelid when she said that. Now, this kind of thinking, it's actually a belief that they have that can result in the killing of 500,000 innocent children and feel no remorse about that. How do you solve that kind of, how do you help a person like that get rid of that belief, Benny, that it's okay to kill innocent children if, that's going to serve your purpose? That to me seems like an unresolvable problem. I don't know if I'm wrong in saying that, but what do you think, Benny?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think, again, I'm not disputing any of the facts.
Yeah.
I'm saying in my world, I can spend days, hours, weeks, months, years, and decades talking about this, analyzing it, finding the proof how screwed up the system is, getting other people to agree with me, complaining about it, writing blogs, doing protest marches, doing all sorts of things, which in my school of thought just adds more fuel to the fire.
Right.
It creates just more of the same. So I don't know, about other people. I really believe in a world as within, so without. So for me, in that selfish way, it starts with me. And I start checking inside of me, how am I living my life? And then I change what I can inside of me, and I treat people the best way that I know how to, and I help those people who want to be helped. And one of the ways that I help people is to, when they habitually focus on what isn't working, what is wrong, and what is screwed up, is to start changing the focus to becoming what they actually want instead. Most people, you can do this and tell me the results if you want. I drive a lot in this country. I give a lot of people lifts. They're typically people who are black and poor in this country, in South Africa. But I also, try it with your friends. Ask people what they want in life, and 9 times out of 10, they will tell you what they don't want.
Correct, yes.
So, what do you want? Well, I'm working so hard and I don't want this, and I'm sick and tired of poverty. Yeah, I get that. What do you want instead? Most people are so focused on what isn't working and what is wrong, and energetically, in my school of thought, it just creates more of the same. So I'm not suggesting, again, we just put icing on a mud cake. We absolutely acknowledge that some things aren't working, and then instead of, almost like delving into it deeper and deeper and deeper and finding more proof about how screwed up the system is, let's start changing ourselves first and start acting and behaving in a way that we want to see other people do, and then help those people who want to be helped and start changing our focus on what we want instead. I think that's the way to change it.
Absolutely. I can't agree with you more there, Benny. Absolutely. Because it seems like most people are programmed for failure rather than success, by the looks of it.
How do you mean?
Because the world is in such a messed up state and people are not achieving their goals. People are just sick all the time. Being a doctor, there's a massive global crisis in healthcare, including the global crisis in cancer, the cancer crisis. But there's a large, massive crisis around the world in the healthcare environment. It's just billions of sick people who are just not getting better. It's actually getting worse over the years. It's been worsening. So rather than the world improving, it seems to be getting worse. So that's what I mean when I say people are programmed for failure rather than success. Now the point I'm trying to make is that we need to help people then turn this around. And the question I want to ask you is that it has to be on a massive scale, but obviously everybody's trying in this field that you are in, trying to help people on an individual or small group basis. But what programs do you specifically offer, Benny, to help individuals and maybe groups also? To try and turn this tide around, to what we're facing. Yeah.
I would love to respond to that. I really appreciate the opportunity. I think one of the main reasons why, as you say, healthcare is in the state that it's in, and more people than ever are ill, and antidepressants, the use of them are on the rise like never before, yet so are suicides. Suicide rate, millions of people a year. I think one of the main reasons is because people have abdicated their responsibility for getting better to either tablets or doctors, right, instead of using the wisdom of the medical profession with their own inherent ability to heal. So I think starting to re-empower people about, hold on a second, your body knows how to heal. How do we know that? Because when you cut it, it heals. If you're not healing from a disease, how about instead of taking a pill immediately, how about actually taking a look at how else you can support your body to heal itself? I think we lost, in ancient Chinese times, the doctors were paid when the nation was healthy and well.
Yes.
They were not paid to heal them. It was the other way around. We've lost something in translation. And please appreciate, I have very close friends who are doctors. The medical profession has saved my life, saved my parents' life. I have nothing against the medical profession itself. I am suggesting to people who run to a doctor at the first whiff of a nose run or a tummy ache that we've lost some taking responsibility for our own well-being and healing. And it is therefore no surprise to me that more people are sick than ever before. Somehow we've abdicated this responsibility. When I'm sick, I want to come to you and you need to heal me by putting a chemical in my body. And, it's completely, I almost said ass about face, and then I remembered we were on radio. So for me, the two tools that I use the most, that I dedicate my life to teaching people around the world, is EFT, emotional freedom techniques, and something called matrix re-imprinting. With matrix re-imprinting is specifically designed to change beliefs. And again, what I love about it is once you know the technique, you can apply it to yourself. So it's totally back to taking full responsibility for your own well-being, for what you want in your own world, in your own life, and healing from the inside out, rather than wanting the world to be different, and then you can be happy, and then you can be healthy, and then you can be wealthy. These two tools, EFT and Matrix, for me, has changed my life beyond any recognition. And I think one of the keys of why it works so well, other than the fact that it's scientifically proven and we know that it works, is it's all based on the principle of as within, so without. As I change on the inside, my world around me can change, not the other way around.
So it's like people have forgotten the power that they possess within.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, again, so some people will say, well, that's exactly what I mean. That's a conspiracy theory. They, whoever they are, they cheated us out of this, and they keep us trapped with debt, and they keep us stuck in jobs. Even if that is true, and I don't know that it is, but even if it is true, whose responsibility is it to change it? That would be mine today, sir. So, it doesn't matter what people say to me. I say it always comes back to personal responsibility, changing on the inside, healing on the inside, and then seeing how almost by default your world starts changing on the outside. And I think the best thing that we can do to help people on a massive scale, something like EFT, for example, it doesn't matter whether you do EFT with 2 people or 200 people or 2,000 people at a time. It's as effective. Why? Because they apply it on themselves. If, like they have done in places like Rwanda, where there was massive genocide, gone in there and done large groups of people with EFT, empowering people to feel better about themselves, to release the traumas and the emotional hurts of the past, so that they can start looking forward and say, where do they want to take their lives, and start moving on that path with focus and confidence and believing in themselves to actually do it, and then getting the according results.
So we need to do this on a massive scale, Benny. Would you sort of say it's a good idea to introduce EFT into the education system, or how would we get people to change their beliefs to become more, to work for them rather than against them? Because obviously most people's beliefs are working against them right now.
Yes, and most of us aren't even aware of it because our deeply held beliefs are unconscious, as we said before. Faiz, I have so many of these types of conversations. There are so many infinite possibilities. I can only imagine how something like EFT, which is, cost effective to the point of being unreasonable. If I compare it with other techniques out there, what large organizations pay for other services, if we can take EFT into prisons or into addiction centers or into schools, And of course, one of my personal passions is to take it into boardrooms in South Africa. If we can start taking these types of personal responsibility, healing, spiritual tools, whatever you want to call them, into the executive people in this country, being top politicians or, top execs of banks and insurance companies and motor companies, and start changing the energy with which those people view and operate in the world, and we can start helping the decision makers to become, if we want to use a spiritual word, more whole, then I think that will change, certainly this country, very, very quickly. So starting from the top down, but then also starting at just people like you and me's level, people who are struggling out there, who are in addiction or in poverty or out of jail and can't find a job. I recently did a talk at the South African College of Applied Psychology, and I said that in South Africa we think that apartheid is over. But I beg to differ quite radically on that point. I don't think it's over by a long stretch, and here's why. If people, and let's say black people in this country, because they were the people that were largely affected by apartheid, if any people, in this case black people in this country, believe themselves to be inferior based on what they were taught generations ago or 4 generations, it's going to be very hard for them to be truly successful. And I believe no handout and no government program, and even if you build them a house a day, will, until they change the belief on the inside, the factually incorrect belief, yet the one that they live with, it's as embedded in their limbic systems as my beliefs that I have about myself is embedded in mine. That's the place where I think things will start changing. If we can help people who believe things about themselves that make them inferior, not as good as, any of those things, and they can start showing up in the world as feeling great about themselves, knowing that they have lots to contribute, that's when things will really start changing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I like the idea of going to the top, trying to help those guys at the top, change themselves energetically and become more whole, like you say. I can't agree more with you there. And also going down to the lower levels, people in society. Because like I think Henry Ford said, if you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right.
Absolutely.
You're right, so...
Yeah. There's a settlement in Blikkiesdorp that I was invited to go to maybe 2 years ago now, and there was a whole day. Solly Philander was there with his radio station. It was a very beautiful day. We were asked to take oranges, and then there were people, donated money, and they opened a new library that day. So, and I was asked to go and do some EFT, which I did. And I thought I was going to do one-to-one sessions, and suddenly I look up, and there's like about 40, local people coming to me saying they're here for whatever I have to offer. So what I said to them, and they just instinctively got what I said, so they were all black and colored people, and I was one of 2 or 3 white people in that particular group. So just acknowledging how they feel about themselves based on the apartheid government that happened, before them, they totally got it. I said, listen, folks, by the end of the day, we will all leave. The oranges will all be finished. In a couple of weeks, you would have read all the books in the library, and we all know that money eventually runs out. So a few weeks from now, unless you feel different about yourself, nothing is going to have changed, and you're going to wait for the next handout. They completely got it. Right. And again, we're not blaming the victim. I totally appreciate how it came about that they believe these things about themselves. And still, however it came, it's the exact same argument we had before. Whether I had an abusive childhood or a happy one, it's still my responsibility to change my beliefs. Whether apartheid happened or didn't happen, we can't go and change that. That's what happened. That's the problem. So if a large number of people in this country walk around with the inherent belief, doesn't matter whether they have an executive position and drive a new BMW, if they inherently believe they're inferior, they have to show up in the world in that way, and will probably get results accordingly. So for me, I'm all for programs, I'm all for handouts, I'm all for education. I'm saying unless we start touching this in the limbic brain, unless we start helping people changing their beliefs about themselves, I don't see much changing anywhere in the world.
Yep, absolutely. Can't agree with you more. And the challenge is, how do we get to do this for millions of people? That's the big challenge, because without changing their beliefs, those self-limiting, self-sabotaging beliefs which are keeping them, in the positions they are, how are you going to change the world? It's a big challenge, I think, Benny.
It is, and I think the solution is to take something like EFT, which is relatively simple to teach people. I do a basic level 1 and 2 course in 4 days. After the 4 days, people know enough to help themselves and help other people. So I think the solution is to take something like EFT into communities, but instead of just going there as a gesture of goodwill and helping them for the day or and then leaving, to actually start teaching local people how to use it. In other words, to train them to become trainers and practitioners, and let those people help themselves in their own communities. They understand their context, they understand their language, they understand their culture much better than I do. So, because we can teach this to people on a large scale, again, you can have 100 or 200 or 1,000 people in a room and teach them EFT all at the same time. And then help those people to go out and start changing their own communities. Let's just, for the time being, forget about the politicians and the banks and the oil companies.
Right.
Let's start changing ourselves and collectively how we feel about ourselves, and see how, we are talking at a certain level, talking about magic fires.
Okay.
If you really believe in infinite possibilities, either they exist or they don't. I happen to believe that they do. And I know whenever I get contracted about a situation, I close down options and possibilities. So I'm not suggesting to, walk into an impoverished area and say to somebody, say 3 positive affirmations every day and you'll have a new car tomorrow. That's ridiculous. Yeah. What I am saying to somebody, if you're willing to do the inner work and start feeling differently about yourself and start looking for opportunities and start just opening up energetically. In other words, change your beliefs from, I'm stuck in this poverty, nothing good ever happens to me, I'm going to be poor until I die, I'm inferior, and then, it's think, feel, do, have, then getting that outcome and being right about it. If we can educate people, I don't mean left brain educate, I mean emotionally change the way they feel about themselves, I believe they have every chance to create a different future for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Have to agree with you there, Benny. Absolutely have to agree with you there. Well, I think we've come to the end of our time. Is there anything else you want to tell us, Benny, before we wrap up the show?
I think I wanted to say to people, EFT, it's very simple to do the basics on yourself. So have a look. There's so many websites out there with EFT, emotional freedom techniques on it. The next time you have a headache or a tummy ache, or you're anxious about a public presentation, or sad about a relationship that's broken down, before you head for the pill bottle, consider spending 5, 10 or 15 or 20 minutes just tapping on yourself. The technique is so simple. You tap on the same point every time and see how much better you actually feel, and see if you want to make that a way of living. So taking responsibility back for your health, taking responsibility to start feeling better about yourself, not with willpower, but by actually changing the painful beliefs that you were taught when you were little, that we all know intellectually isn't true, but still, is the blueprint of our lives and run our lives until the day that we decide we've had enough and we start changing them.
Benny, I have given your website address out, but perhaps you want to just tell us what it is again?
Sure, it's deepliving.com.
Well, fantastic. Benny, I want to thank you once again for, agreeing to join us on the show this evening. It was a fantastic discussion. Really loved it. I hope the listeners did too. Sorry about those technical glitches up front, but we're going to have to look at, changing our streaming service, but we'll look at that during the week. Benny, I want to thank you once again. Thank you, man, for your time. And people out there, we've just discussed the fact that beliefs affect your health and wellness. No doubt about that. That has been proven scientifically. And so in order to optimize your health and wellness, improve the quality of your life and everything else, you have to identify those negative, self-limiting, self-sabotaging beliefs and eliminate them, neutralize them using various energy tools. And one of the most powerful ones that I've come across, and what Benny was discussing, and he's a specialist in this field, is emotional freedom techniques, EFT. So people can contact you, Benny, via your website?
Absolutely, please do.
Okay, fantastic. And then Benny will explain more if you want to learn more about EFT. So thank you once again, Benny, and thanks to the listeners for joining us this evening. We really appreciate, your time with us. Thanks once again. Ciao for now.
Thanks, Pius. Great to connect with you, man.
Thanks, Benny. Take care.